Hello, students of Pali. Welcome to this companion series to A.K. Warder's Grammar Guide, An Introduction to Pali. Today it's Lesson 17, which is mainly a recap of what we've learnt so far. I'll warn you now that there's going to be a lot of terrifying tables. Classical languages seem to be characterised by a nightmarish quantity of tables. But don't be disheartened, as I will provide an alternative. So, let's begin. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. Well, we're going to start with a review of the declension cases. If you remember, nouns in Pali fall into different groups depending on how their stem ends. And so far, Warder has concentrated on A-stem nouns, with the short A being for masculine and neuter nouns, and the feminine gender noun in long A. So, taking these nouns as examples, if we now look at how they decline, we can see that the neuter noun has the same endings as the masculine, except in the nominative and the accusative plural forms, while feminine nouns have their own thing going on. Now from these examples we can extract a generalised table of endings, and I've rearranged this table a little bit so that similar endings fall together, and so we get our familiar declension table. And from this table we can see that there's actually a lot of commonality, especially among the feminine endings, and mainly in the plural. It's only really in the masculine and neuter singular that each case is clearly distinguished. And I should also point out that these endings are the most common, but there are several less regular endings which aren't shown here. If we now turn to pronouns, we can give a declension table for the personal pronoun, and this is in the singular. Again, there are less frequent forms that are not shown here. Now, there are two forms on this table which I haven't shown before, and they are me and te in the first and second person, and these are called enclitic forms. A clitic is a technical term for a contracted word form that occurs only in combination with another word. In English, these are a relatively small number of frequently occurring words, often with auxiliary verbs, and the clitic contraction is marked by an apostrophe, and so they're often called apostrophe words: don't, won't, can't, etc. So the resultant term is a combination of a host word and the clitic contraction. Now, if the clitic term comes before its host, these are called proclictics, and I can only think of one example in English. Much more frequently, the clitic term comes after the host word, in which case they're called enclictics. So clitic is just a technical term for something which is actually very familiar. Okay. Now, in Pali, the concept of clitics is very loose. Here, me and te are enclitic pronouns. Being enclitic means that they can't come first in a sentence or clause, but they can follow just about any Pali word, and though occasionally joined to their preceding host, they equally can stand as a discrete word themselves. Homage to you. Heard by me. Interestingly, the whole vocative case is enclitic, and so a vocative noun is never the first word in a sentence. And if we now look at the plural personal pronouns, we can see no and vo, which are also enclitic and represent any first or second person pronoun case except the nominative or the locative. And notice that the singular enclitic form te overlaps with the third person nominative, So the form te can actually have several meanings. If you remember, the third-person personal pronoun forms are the same as the demonstrative. These are the demonstrative pronoun forms based on the stem ta, but there are several others, so we can have those based on the stem eta, which are similar but just with an e sound in front. And Warden now introduces us to a similar form on the stem na, and there are also those based on the stem ima. Finally, if we go back to the ta stem forms, we can see the similarity with the relative pronouns based on the stem ya, and also with the interrogative pronouns based on the stem ka. Well, that is a lot of tables, and the traditional method is to memorize these endings, the idea being to look for commonality and then remember the exceptions. I'm not sure if video is actually the best way to present these tables, and I seem to make frequent typos, so beware, and I'd urge you always to check with another source. There are several cheat sheets or short-form tables available online to download. I recommend those from Bhikkhu Jnanatashita's, and I apologise if I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but they can be found on my resources webpage. And I've also produced an A to Z index of pronoun forms, as they aren't particularly well documented in the dictionaries, and links to all of these can be found in the description below. Personally, I prefer to use lookup tools. As Einstein said, never memorize something that you can look up. And appearing above now are some tutorials on Pali language tools. Okay. Next, we come to the adverbial use of the accusative noun. We actually covered this back in lesson 2. Here, Warder adds that any adjective, if in the accusative neuter singular, can be used adverbially. That is, to describe the manner, time, or frequency of the action. And when used in this way, they become, in effect, indeclinable, meaning that their gender, case, and number are not made to agree with any other noun in the sentence. So let's get on and look at the next section, which is numerals. Numbers in Pali are somewhat unusual. Their application isn't very regular, and so in this lesson, Warder examines the numbers 1, 2, 5, and 100 and 1,000. So if we begin with the number 1, eka, we can see that it has a similar pattern of declension to the pronoun. Eka then, when used as an integer, behaves like an adjective, agreeing in case, gender and number with the noun that it qualifies. But it also can be used more pronominally, often with an indefinite sense, so in the singular it's like an indefinite article, or a certain. And perhaps counterintuitively, in the plural, eka means some men, some women. Now the numbers 2 and 5 are a little different. I think they only have plural forms and are essentially genderless, so they agree with their noun in case only. And in compound words, the number 2 often takes alternative forms, dvi, di, do, as well as dve. And something I forgot to say when we looked at Devanda compounds, 2 numbers combined usually implies addition. 1 and 20 equals 21. But an exception to this rule is with the word ada, meaning a half. When adder is compounded with another number, it usually means minus a half. So diada is literally 2 minus a half, or 1.5. Sometimes this is explicit, as in ekuna visati, which is literally 1 less 20, or 19. But more often not. Anyway, let's return to Warda. The numerals satang, 100, and sahasang, 1,000, are again in effect genderless, but they decline like an A-stem neuter noun, and can be found in both the plural and the singular. They take either the same case as the noun that they qualify, or that noun can be in the genitive, usually with the numeral then being in the nominative. But importantly, they never change gender. So these all mean 100 Brahmin. And when Devanda compounds are formed with these numbers, quite often they imply a multiplication. So diyada satang is literally 2 minus a half multiplied by 100, or 150. Right. In the final section we look at conjunctives. These are indeclinable particles, and we've come across some already. They can operate at the level of phrases to connect individual words, gods and men, and being enclitic, they usually follow the words that they connect. Or they may operate at the level of clauses to make what is called a compound sentence. In this case, the conjunctive particle is placed near the beginning of each clause that is joined. This example actually has a couple of interesting features. Notice that the nigahita of tvang and ahang becomes palatalized before ka, and the verb banda is actually in its bare stem form, which for A-stem verbs makes it a second-person imperative, thus creating an instruction, you bind. Unlike English, every word or phrase connected, generally, is followed by a conjunctive particle. Though not always, and sometimes there's only one ka or va, with the arrangement being somewhat arbitrary. Warda summarises several conjunctions that we've seen so far, and provides references to the exercises where examples can be found. So I think we'll leave lesson 17 here. Warda gives us a whole load more vocabulary to learn, which is then followed by exercise 17. The answers to exercise 16 are the final ones available on the Wisdom and Wonders webpage, which is linked below. I'll try and find an alternative for this exercise, which I'll provide when we look at the next chapter. And in the meantime, of course, don't forget there are my other tutorials and my blog.